I first became aware of, I obviously knew like cheerleaders are like an American, like classic image of like the cheerleader. So I knew that, there were football cheerleaders and NFL teams had cheerleaders. But when I first became kind of fascinated with NFL cheerleading and more aware of it, it was actually the year I graduated from the workshop. I discovered this article in the New York Times that was about a group of Buffalo Bills cheerleaders who were suing the Bills for essentially for wage theft, arguing that they'd been misclassified as independent contractors and they should be classified as employees and that they weren't paid fairly for their time. And I just graduated. I was kind of realizing that my degree had put me in a position where the job I was most qualified for was to be an adjunct instructor in colleges, which is basically like an independent contractor teacher in colleges where you're sort of cobbling together as many classes as you can to make a living. And so realizing that these cheerleaders had banded together over like questions about wages and working rights and fairness right when I was sort of transitioning into a new part of my adulthood career, how I was going to make money, I just became so obsessed with it. And so I just kind of went full throttle into that world, wanting to know everything about it, inspired the first time by that article. We start off with Virginia. She's our narrator. She grew up in Buffalo and has kind of recently returned after going to college in Ohio and having some difficult experiences there with her younger sister. And upon moving back to Buffalo and joining the Jills as a cheerleader, she meets a woman who rapidly becomes her best friend, a woman named Janine. So Virginia and Janine are kind of the first relationship that you're introduced to. Virginia is this sort of, she's kind of an upright character. She's an older sibling. She likes to do the right thing. She likes to take care of people around her. And like a lot of cheerleaders, she's very organized. Cheerleading is a huge time. It takes a lot of time and effort to be a cheerleader, so they tend to be these very organized, scheduled, have it together type of women. And Virginia is totally kind of like has that persona. Janine is almost the opposite. She's a party girl. She's fun. She's irreverent. She introduces Virginia to this idea that she can let loose more, that she can have more fun, that she doesn't always have to be the dutiful older sister doing the right thing for everybody. And their relationship becomes really, really tight and intimate fast. They just form this really great friendship. But then at the start of the book, Janine disappears. She doesn't show up for a game on Sunday, and she's not returning anyone's calls, and she doesn't show up to practice. And Virginia, being the responsible person she is, takes it upon herself to figure out what happened to Janine. And that's sort of what kickstarts the plot of the book. I am a highly intuitive writer. I don't tend to outline. I go on whims. I go on vibes. It's a very inefficient way to write. I'm a heavy reviser. I tend to go back. When I get to the point where I make an outline of my work, it tends to be a scene list of what I've already written. And when I kind of switch into that mode of being a little bit more intentional about plot and order of scenes, I've I've already spent a lot of time sketching out the stories, finding these sort of wisps of scenes and dialogue that feel right, that feel like the right tone. I don't write in order. I tend to I'll find my way into, characters having dialogue with each other and realizing like, oh, this relationship is important. I need to be developing that. And over time, the scenes start to sort of fall in order. And then I start to be a little bit more deliberate. So it's a little inefficient and very intuitive, but I find that is the most effective way for me to write because I feel like I can follow more what like the emotional tones and like the deeper character issues are. I can find them more when I write that way. I had presumptions about cheerleading. First of all, I thought they were paid a full-time salary to be cheerleaders. I found that's not the case. They're paid by game. Actually, the Jill's cheerleaders weren't even paid for their games. They were paid in comped tickets. So they're paid to perform at games. They're sometimes paid for like corporate appearances, or they're paid by like sponsors to do appearances around the city. But when they do appearances where they either go perform or interact with community members that are charity or that are for the NFL, they wouldn't necessarily get paid for those. And so realizing that it's this really scrappy gig, like the cheerleaders, they're so made up, they're so put together, they're so beautiful, they're this sort of like classic Americana, femininity. It's sexy and professional at the same time, realizing that it's actually a really scrappy undertaking. You have to work so hard to keep your life in order, to stay organized, to make it to hours of practice, driving around the city for appearances, making sure you're on time, making sure your appearance is perfect, your makeup is like on point, your hair is set. You don't look weird in a photo. You didn't say anything weird to a sponsor. Like you're always on, managing that and a full-time job so you can support yourself. I mean, those are the conditions that you have to navigate when you're a cheerleader. Um, and as a fellow like gig worker, I've never been a cheerleader. I've never gone through like the particular struggles they have, but as a gig worker, I really like related to that. So getting to know like the ins and outs of what are the actual day-to-day challenges of being a cheerleader, but also what are the rewards of it. And talking to cheerleaders was really, really helpful with that. Over the course of writing this book, I would blab about it to people and talk about, how the writing process was going. And every once in a while, I'd encounter someone who's like, "Oh, you're writing about cheerleaders. My cousin's friend from high school's sister was a cheerleader. Do you want to talk to her?" And I'd be like, "If she wants to talk to me, I want to talk to her." And over the course of writing the book, I managed to gather a small, wonderful handful of former cheerleaders and also former NBA dancers who were willing to talk to me. NBA dancers are not cheerleaders, by the way, and you should not call them that. They get upset. But it was still helpful to talk to people who danced for a major sports organization. And one of the things that really stood out to me was that in cheerleading, there's a lot of paradoxes and almost moments of like cognitive dissonance where because cheerleading is it's very hard work and the friendships are so intense. I often would get the feeling that this was like one of the most challenging and also one of the best things that ever happened, like, or one of the top things that ever happened for the woman who was a cheerleader. And holding both of those at once was really complex. And I really wanted to reflect that in the book, that cheerleading has some parts of it are really messed up, like the pay structure and the scrutiny and the body image pressures. Like there's parts of like it's really messed up, and it's like one of the best experiences you can have at the same time. And somehow both of those they are actually true. And I wanted to make space for that. The seemingly impossible two things, I wanted to make space for them both to be true in the book as well. So the characters that came to light early and stayed throughout. The team of Jills, like the other cheerleaders, there is a character named Charisse who plays a big role in this, who is uh this I don't know, she's a great supporting character. She has a very clear-eyed view about like the difficulties of cheerleading, but also is like intensely loyal, like very like deeply invested in her friendships, and she becomes like somebody who helps Virginia um navigate her investigation of Janine. So Charisse and the other Jills, but especially Charisse, were important characters. Um, Janine has an ex-boyfriend named Landon who becomes an important character. And Landon came into being very early as somebody who knows Janine from growing up. They started dating in high school. And so he really has seen her over the course of her life. And, she had this sort of troubled teenage years. She got into drugs for a while, got clean. She competed in beauty pageants, wanted to be a model, but, her life had some really twists and turns, and Landon was there for her throughout that. So Landon is able to fill in a lot of background information about Janine and has maybe a clearer view of her than Virginia does. And a huge, I mean, she ends up being a kind of main character by the end of the book, but also Virginia's little sister, Laura. So this is one of the most important relationships in the book. Her uh, Virginia's relationship with Laura is very troubled because Laura too had a drug problem in her teenage years, and Virginia really wanted to save her and felt she wasn't able to do it. And now, several years later, Laura is clean, she's sober, and she's trying to come back into Virginia's life. So they're re-navigating their relationship. And the other character who's coming to mind is Stanley, who Stanley Palladino is a sort of father figure to Virginia. He employed her father before her father passed away. Virginia's father died when she was 11. And after her father died, Stanley sort of stepped in. He is essentially runs an organized crime sort of ring in Buffalo. He owns restaurants. He does some stuff with sports betting. And as the book goes on, you realize there might be some other, maybe a little bit darker businesses that are going on. And so Stanley's an important figure as like someone who Virginia sees as a protector, but she grows to see him more clearly over the course of the book. And his son Bobby, who's sort of growing to take over the family business, is also Janine's current boyfriend. I feel like that was a very complicated web that I just sort of, but I was realizing as I was saying like, oh, everyone's because then Stanley and then there's Bobby and then yeah, so it's a web of characters, and Buffalo is I think a city that's kind of like a small town, so people are very interconnected there, and so you find a lot of the characters actually have backgrounds with each other, knowledge of each other as kids, and that ends up coming into play as Virginia's investigating and also realizing deeper truths about the people in her life. I sometimes feel like I am on an anthropological dig where the characters and the shape of the book is there beneath layers of earth, and I have to just dig and sweep and look and start to realize like, oh, I'm starting to see the shape of what this thing is. And what that means is sometimes I will spend time digging in a place where there is no book there. So I will write scenes that don't go in the book, or I'll write scenes of dialogue that like, oh, it doesn't actually feel right for this character. Like I kind of feel like I'm forcing this, or I'm not really getting to the heart of what's going on in this relationship between these two people, and I have to like readjust and start digging somewhere else, or find another part of the book that feels a little more solid and dig around there. And so I will often have these feelings that these characters are kind of fully formed and I'm just trying to find them. I'm trying to talk to them. I'm trying to find their shape, their outline. And so dialogue is a really good way to do that, just getting characters to talk to each other. One of the things I think is so that makes the like minor characters or secondary characters so important is that when they point things out that the main character hasn't conceived of yet, you're getting to know both of them at the same time. And so creating space for dialogue where I can put the main character in a position where she's challenged and also learn more about the secondary character in the process, it kind of organically both characters start to form and come into being through that. I did a lot of research into NFL cheerleading too, and the great thing was I was able to connect with cheerleaders who would talk to me. So I was able to do interviews for these sort of underworld spaces. I didn't have sources that were part of Buffalo's or anybody's underground criminal networks. And Buffalo isn't like a crime hub or anything like that. Every city has its underbellies, and every city has a drug trade of some kind. Every city has people who are finding alternative ways to get by in the world. So but I really liked Buffalo because it has experienced like boom and bust of industries, which means like it can be economic hardships and sudden turns. Like to me, it feels right like a rife place to talk about money and who makes money and who has access to certain industries and why. So I liked Buffalo as a setting to explore those topics. But I didn't have any sources, although I did find a book about, I can't remember the title right now. I'd have to dig it out of my shelves, but I did find a book about like Buffalo during the Prohibition and like, the trade of like alcohol from Canada across Lake Erie into Buffalo. So I borrowed a lot from just like mafia movies, crime novels, things like that to settle into that mode and into that world, but also try to stay true to the fact that like, oh, how do these themes play out in a city like Buffalo? It's interesting, like because so this book is set in like 2011, 2012, which is pre-online sports betting. So sports betting's still like illegal underground. Um, and so it's really interesting thinking about this book through the lens of now, because I mean, sports betting is this like massive industry. Like you're watching a football game and getting ads for sports betting sites like while you're watching the game. So it's really fascinating thinking about how what we consider like criminal or ethical will change over time as becomes monetized or becomes more mainstream. So it is really interesting to think about that. And I think one of the so because addiction is a theme in this book. So you have several characters who have been through and come out the other side of drug addictions. And Virginia, you know, her little sister went through that, her best friend went through that. I think Virginia has this very deep understanding of like the emotional intensity of going through an experience like that, and she's seen people she loves go through them. And there's actually a line in the book where she's talking to Landon, and she's talking about the kind of crime that Stanley does, which is have sports betting, and you know, poker, underground poker games, things like that, in addition to other things. But and she's like, it's just gambling. Like, who cares? Why should I? You know, why should I fear this guy who's always looked out for me, even though he's like kind of a into some criminal activities? Like, why should I be scared of him? It's just gambling. And I think it's because in her mind she's also categorized that as something that you don't necessarily have to worry about. So there is sort of this like tension around ethics and addiction and who's benefiting from certain addictions or compulsions, who's monetizing them, who's taking advantage of them, and then who are the what's the fallout of that? Like, who's the collateral damage in that? And so when she starts to realize some of the other criminal activities that Stanley is involved in, and she's thinking about her experience with her sister and Janine, she's starting to think, I think, a bit more seriously about how the way we, yeah, build industries around addictions or compulsions, like what is the actual impact of that on the ground in families among people? That's kind of sometimes it's explicit, but it's definitely in the background of the book kind of the whole time, I think.